Major Jordan Thomas thought he was prepared for anything, until he made a solemn promise to bring his fallen friend home. But when his journey is interrupted by prejudice and bureaucratic indifference at every turn, Jordan's personal mission becomes a national outrage, igniting protests and capturing the public's attention. As he battles humiliation and mounting delays, he clings to his duty in the memory of his friend, Corporal Liam Donovan. Yet, a hidden truth about Liam's life is revealed, a truth that changes everything Jordan thought he knew. Now, Jordan must decide whether to simply fulfill his promise or turn this journey into a fight for justice, for himself, and for every soldier overlooked by the very country they served. In honor-bound, loyalty, sacrifice, and the true cost of honor collide in a story that will resonate with anyone who has fought for what's right, even when the truth hurts the most. Would you like further expansion on any specific elements? Major Jordan Thomas stepped out of the taxi, the sharp sound of airport life engulfing him, idling engines, hurried footsteps, the faint drone of announcements. He tightened his grip on the small bundle of documents and Liam's dog tag, feeling the weight of his promise settle in his chest. The glass doors slid open as he approached, and Jordan's gaze briefly drifted down to the dog tag in his hand. "We're getting you home, Liam," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. It was a promise, one he would not break. Entering the terminal, Jordan took a deep breath, preparing himself for a quiet but solemn journey. But as he walked toward the check-in counter, his chest tightened, not from grief alone, but from something else he couldn't quite name. Years in the service had taught him to read situations and people, and he had a sense that this journey would not be as smooth as he'd hoped. At the counter, a young woman with a tight bun and professional smile greeted him. Jordan handed her his ticket, military ID, and documents, which included special clearance to transport a military casket. She scanned the papers, her smile dimming as she looked up, an eyebrow slightly raised. "You're Major Thomas?" she asked, voice carefully controlled. Jordan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm transporting the remains of Corporal Liam Donovan." She looked down at the documents, her mouth tightening before she nodded. "Give me a moment, please." She turned, muttering something to her colleague beside her. Jordan could feel the eyes of other passengers brushing over him, some lingering on his uniform and medals. It wasn't the first time he'd felt like he stood out, but today, with his emotions so close to the surface, he felt every glance, every whisper, as a prick on his skin. After a few moments, the woman returned, her smile forced. "Sir, I just need to verify these documents with security. Please wait here." Jordan kept his expression neutral, though he felt a flicker of irritation. "Of course," he replied, fighting to keep his voice calm. Minutes passed, and soon 2 uniformed security officers approached, their faces impassive, eyes assessing. The taller of the two, Officer Ramirez, extended a hand for Jordan's ID. "Major Thomas," he said, flipping the ID over, squinting at it. "We need to do a routine check to verify your documents." Jordan handed over his ID without hesitation, though he felt his patience thinning. "All my paperwork is in order. I need to be on this flight. Corporal Donovan's family is waiting for him." The shorter officer, Phillips, looked Jordan up and down before giving a terse nod. "We understand, Major, but protocol requires a secondary check for all military transport cases." He tilted his head toward a side corridor. "Follow us, please." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he nodded and walked with them, keeping his shoulders squared. He knew this wasn't about protocol, not really. It was a test, an assertion of control, and it made his stomach turn. Inside the small, sterile room, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow. Officer Phillips gestured toward the table in the center of the room. "Please place your belongings on the table, Major," Phillips instructed, a hint of authority in his tone. Jordan unclipped his medals, setting them on the table with careful precision. He added his documents and Liam's dog tag, the sight of it stirring his anger and sadness. Watching the officers sift through his things with indifference made him feel exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years. Phillips picked up the dog tag, turning it over in his fingers with a small, curious frown. "Quite a collection," he muttered, glancing at the medals with a smirk. Jordan's gaze hardened. "That's my friend's," He died saving lives, including mine. Phillips put the dog tag down, unfazed. Just doing my job, Major. After several more minutes of inspection, the officers nodded and began to exit, saying, "You're free to go, sir." "Thank you for your patience." Jordan reattached his medals, ignoring the tremble in his hands. He felt his frustration boiling but held it back, channeling his focus toward Liam and his promise. Back in the terminal, Jordan checked the departure board. His heart sank as he saw delayed, flashing in bold red next to his flight number. He approached the airline desk, his patience worn thin. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to the young woman behind the desk, who looked up from her tablet with a weary expression. "Can you tell me how long the delay will be?" "Not sure yet, sir," she replied, barely glancing up. "Everyone's flight is delayed today. We'll notify you when we have an update." Jordan clenched his jaw. "This isn't just any flight. I'm transporting a soldier's remains. His family is waiting." She finally looked up, her eyes flickering over his uniform. "Understood, sir. But I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." Jordan nodded tightly, forcing himself to stay calm. He took a seat in the waiting area, pulling out Liam's dog tag, tracing the engraved name with his thumb. "Almost there, Liam," he whispered. "I'm not giving up now." Jordan sat quietly in the airport waiting area, watching the delayed message blink on the departure screen with growing irritation. He kept his back straight, his military posture never wavering despite the exhaustion weighing on him. Around him, people were starting to take notice. A few had been nearby when he was taken to secondary screening, and their curiosity grew into murmurs. "Isn't that the guy they were questioning at security?" A woman whispered to her companion. "Phone out, recording." "I think he's military," her companion replied. "That's messed up, treating a soldier like that." Jordan could feel the weight of their eyes, a blend of curiosity and sympathy. He didn't mind their concern, but he wished his journey could remain private. The last thing he wanted was attention that could distract him from his mission. Time passed, and Jordan remained in his seat, eyes on the clock, one hand unconsciously gripping the dog tag in his pocket. Soon, notifications began to ping on his phone. Friends and family sent texts, "Are you okay?" and saw a post about you. Unnerved, Jordan opened his social media feed, where posts were flooding in about his encounter with security. Videos showed him being led away, standing tall and silent as the officers escorted him to the screening room. People were outraged, and his name was quickly becoming a trending topic. "Unbelievable," Jordan muttered to himself, staring at the flood of support mixed with outrage. A nearby passenger, a middle-aged man with a sympathetic smile, looked over. "You all right, Major?" Jordan hesitated. "I'm fine, thank you," he replied, nodding politely, though the situation was rapidly evolving into something beyond his control. "Well, for what it's worth," the man continued, "a lot of people are on your side. It's terrible they put you through that." Jordan gave a slight smile. "Just trying to get my friend home." The man nodded, and Jordan's words sank in, visibly moving him. Jordan returned to his seat, realizing that his mission had unintentionally become a public cause. Not long after, reporters began trickling into the terminal. Jordan tried to ignore them, but it wasn't long before a few approached, microphones and cameras in hand. "Colonel Thomas," one called out, but when Jordan didn't react, the reporter quickly corrected himself. "Major Thomas, could we get a comment on the way airport security treated you?" Jordan looked away, refusing to engage. His mission was to bring Liam home, not to be a headline. But the reporters weren't discouraged. "Major, do you think your treatment was racially motivated?" another reporter pressed. Jordan turned slightly, meeting the reporter's gaze with a calm but steely expression. "I have no comment," he replied, his voice low but firm. His tone made it clear that he was done talking. Undeterred, a younger journalist moved closer. "Sir, what message do you think this sends to other servicemen of color?" Jordan clenched his jaw, inhaling deeply to keep his composure. "I said, no comment," he repeated. The pressure of the media was just beginning to dissipate when Jordan heard a familiar voice over his shoulder. "Still giving him trouble, huh, Thomas?" He turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Foster, his former commanding officer, now retired. Foster had a stern expression softened by familiarity and compassion, his silver hair adding a sense of authority. "Sir, I didn't expect to see you here," Jordan said, relief and respect evident in his tone. Foster grunted, glancing around at the reporters who had started to back off. "Word travels fast. Saw what happened online and thought you could use some backup." Before Jordan could respond, Foster turned to the airport staff and reporters nearby. "This man is on an honorable mission. What he's gone through here is disgraceful, and I'll make sure this reaches the right ears." The reporters' faces went pale at Foster's direct tone, and they shuffled away, realizing they weren't getting any more sound bites. Foster looked back at Jordan, his expression softening. "Thank you, sir," Jordan said quietly. "I didn't mean for this to turn into all of this." "Sometimes the right battles find you," Foster replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "But let's make sure you finish this journey properly." "I'll stay as long as you need me." Jordan gave him a grateful nod, feeling a renewed strength. With Foster there, he felt a weight lift. He wasn't alone. With Foster by his side, Jordan returned to the waiting area. Just as they were settling in, the loudspeaker announced another delay for his flight. Jordan's patience, already strained, was now at its limit. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, clenching his fist. Foster looked at him sympathetically. "The longer they make you wait, the more you strengthen your resolve." Jordan shook his head, exhaling slowly. "I just don't understand. It's not about me. It's about Liam, his family waiting on the other side." Foster leaned forward, his tone quiet but firm. "Listen to me, Jordan. This mission is about honoring Liam, yes, but maybe it's also about showing people what real dedication looks like." Jordan glanced up at him, his frustration ebbing slightly. Foster's words resonated, though Jordan hadn't wanted to carry the weight of something so public. Foster's phone vibrated, and he checked it, a slight frown crossing his face. "The protests outside are growing," he said, showing Jordan a video of crowds holding signs, chanting for respect and accountability. Jordan closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. He wasn't just carrying Liam's memory anymore. He was carrying the voices of everyone who had seen what he'd endured, who were moved by his quiet dignity and resolve. "We'll get there," Foster assured him. "We'll make sure you get to that family." With a renewed sense of purpose, Jordan sat back, waiting for the next chapter of this unexpected journey, ready to face whatever else lay ahead. Outside the airport, a crowd of people began to gather, holding signs that read, "Respect our soldiers" and "Justice for Major Thomas." The protest started small but quickly grew as people who had seen videos of Jordan's treatment on social media joined in. Inside the terminal, Jordan could hear the faint sound of chanting. He exchanged a glance with Foster, who gave him a firm nod. "You've got people out there who believe in what you're doing, Jordan. This isn't just about you anymore." Jordan exhaled, his eyes narrowing as he watched the people streaming into the terminal, some carrying signs, others taking photos and videos. "I never wanted this to turn into a spectacle." "Sometimes the choice isn't yours," Foster replied quietly, "but the way you handle it is. Just stay steady." Jordan nodded, trying to keep his focus on Liam and his mission. But as the chants grew louder, he realized he was no longer carrying just his friend's memory. He was carrying the hopes of the people rallying outside. As the protest intensified, reporters became bolder, pressing in with questions about Jordan's experience. They hovered around the gate, snapping photos and recording every move. The pressure was mounting, and the questions grew sharper. "Major Thomas," one reporter called out as she approached, "how do you feel about the way security treated you? Do you think this is part of a larger issue?" Jordan kept his gaze forward, unwilling to be drawn in. But she persisted, moving in front of him. "Major, don't you think the public deserves to know the truth?" Foster stepped in, holding up a hand. "The Major is here to bring a fallen soldier home. Respect his silence." The reporter backed off slightly, but she wasn't done. "Doesn't he have a responsibility to speak up, especially if this treatment is something others experience? Isn't silence complicit?" Jordan felt a rush of anger, but kept his expression controlled. "I'm not here for your sound bites," he said calmly. "I'm here for my friend." The reporter frowned but couldn't get a rise out of him. She turned away, frustrated. As Jordan's phone began to buzz in his pocket, he pulled it out, surprised to see an old contact name flashing on the screen. General Adams, Jordan said, his voice steady as he answered the call. Thomas, the general's deep, steady voice came through. I've been briefed on your situation. Let me just say, I don't take lightly to seeing one of my own treated this way. Thank you, sir, Jordan replied. It's been challenging. Challenging doesn't begin to cover it. Adams replied with a hint of steel in his tone. I've reached out to the airline's management and some folks at the top. They're scrambling to clean this up, as they should be. I'll do what I can to expedite your flight. Jordan felt a surge of gratitude. I appreciate that, General. I just want to bring Liam home. I know, son, Adams said, his voice softening. And we're going to make sure you do. Stay focused, and don't let these distractions cloud your purpose. Yes, sir, Jordan replied, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. When the call ended, he glanced at Foster, who had been watching him with a knowing expression. Adams on your side? Foster asked with a small smile. Jordan nodded. He's going to pull some strings to get us out of here sooner. Good, Foster replied, his gaze shifting to the reporters who still lingered nearby. We'll need all the help we can get. Not long after the call, a young airline representative, visibly nervous, approached Jordan. She adjusted her name tag, her face flushed as she offered a shaky smile. Major Thomas? She began, her voice tentative. On behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for any inconvenience you faced. We value your service, and we deeply regret how things unfolded. Jordan raised an eyebrow, his voice steady but skeptical. Inconvenience is putting it lightly. The woman nodded quickly, her cheeks coloring. I understand. To make up for everything, we'd like to offer you an upgrade to first class, and you'll have access to our VIP lounge while you wait. Jordan met her gaze evenly. I'm not here for upgrades. I'm here to bring my friend home with respect and dignity. The representative faltered, casting a glance at Foster as if hoping for help. Of course, sir. We're doing everything we can to expedite the process. Foster crossed his arms, his tone firm. That's a start. But remember, this is about honoring a soldier. Keep that in mind as you work to expedite things. The woman nodded vigorously and hurried away, and Jordan couldn't help but feel the hollowness of her apology. He looked at Foster, who was watching him with a knowing expression. Cheap words, Foster muttered. They're just trying to save face. Jordan nodded, his resolve only strengthening. It's going to take more than an apology to make things right. Hours passed, and the frustration in the terminal was palpable. Jordan tried to keep his focus as he waited by the gate, but his patience was wearing thin. Every delay, every dismissive glance from staff, felt like a personal insult to the mission he was trying to complete. Foster sat beside him, silent, but his presence was a steadying force. They're going to keep throwing obstacles, Foster said finally, breaking the silence. But that's what makes your mission more important. Jordan nodded slowly, the exhaustion visible in his eyes. It's just, all these people, all this noise. Liam deserves better. He does, Foster agreed, his voice low and resolute. But this right here is why it matters. Every obstacle they throw at you is another chance to show them you won't back down. And that's what people are going to remember. Jordan looked around, seeing the faces of the protesters outside and the sympathetic glances from passengers inside. He took a deep breath, feeling his frustration harden into something else, determination. I promised Liam I'd get him home, he said quietly, his voice steady. No matter what it takes. Foster clapped him on the shoulder. Then we keep waiting. And when the time comes, we'll make sure he's treated with the honor he deserves. Jordan sat back, the fire in his eyes unwavering. He had faced battles before, but this one was different. It was personal, not just for him, but for everyone who believed in what he was fighting for. The delay dragged on, but Jordan's resolve remained unbroken. He was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the journey was far from over. After hours of waiting and hearing nothing, Jordan stood, heading directly to the airline desk. Foster watched him go, nodding in quiet approval. Excuse me, Jordan said firmly to the desk agent, who looked up, surprised by his unwavering gaze. I need an update on the transfer arrangements for my friend's casket. It's been delayed long enough. The agent sighed, glancing at her screen before offering him a tired smile. Sir, as I said, we're working on it, but you'll have to wait like everyone else. This isn't just everyone else, Jordan replied, keeping his voice steady. I have authorization to transport a military casket. I need confirmation that it's being handled with the dignity it deserves. The agent's expression faltered, but she quickly covered it. I'm not sure I can help with that. Jordan's patience wore thin. Then put me in touch with someone who can, he said, voice firm but calm. Realizing he wasn't getting answers, Jordan pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the airport's cargo services. He waited, listening to the automated system and tapping his fingers impatiently on the counter. After being transferred twice, a gruff voice finally answered. Cargo services, what can I do for you? This is Major Jordan Thomas, he replied, maintaining his composure. I'm calling about the military casket for Corporal Liam Donovan. I need confirmation that it's ready for transfer. There was a long pause on the other end. Listen, man, we're busy down here. Military or not, you're gonna have to wait. We'll get to it when we get to it. Jordan's grip tightened around the phone. With respect, that's unacceptable. I'm coming down there myself to make sure it's handled properly. Before the man could argue, Jordan hung up, his mind already set. Foster, who had been watching, nodded in silent support. Sometimes, you've got to take matters into your own hands, Foster said, standing up. Let's go, Jordan replied, his jaw set with determination. They made their way to the cargo entrance, but as they approached, a security guard stepped forward, blocking their path. Sorry, gentlemen, but this area is restricted, the guard said, crossing his arms. Jordan held up his ID, maintaining eye contact. I'm Major Jordan Thomas, and I have authorization for a military transport. I need to confirm the handling of a casket being stored here. The guard barely glanced at the ID before shaking his head. I don't care who you are. Rules are rules. No unauthorized entry. Foster stepped forward, his expression hardening. Are you really going to deny a decorated officer access to verify the handling of his friend's remains? The guard's smirk was thin. I just follow orders, sir. Jordan took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Call your supervisor. Tell them it's urgent. The guard's eyes flickered with irritation, but after a moment, he muttered into his radio. We have a situation. Some officers insisting on entry. Jordan and Foster waited, their patience wearing thin, each second stretching as they stood firm. After several tense minutes, a supervisor arrived, his face tired and wary as he approached Jordan and Foster. Gentlemen, I hear there's a bit of a disagreement, he said cautiously. Jordan didn't mince words. I'm Major Thomas. I'm here to ensure that the casket of Corporal Liam Donovan is handled properly. We've been given vague responses, delays, and now outright refusal. I won't accept anything less than confirmation of respectful handling. The supervisor studied Jordan, clearly weighing his options before nodding reluctantly. All right, Major. You can verify the arrangements, but we need you to respect our staff and stay out of the way. Understood, Jordan replied with a curt nod. Thank you. The supervisor signaled to the guard, who stepped aside, and Jordan led the way, feeling the weight of each step as he finally approached the cargo area. The cargo area was filled with the sounds of forklifts and the smell of machinery. As they moved through the maze of boxes and equipment, Jordan spotted the casket, draped in an American flag and set on a steel platform. He approached it slowly, his emotions held in check as he reached out to adjust the flag, smoothing it with a reverent touch. His thoughts returned to Liam, to the times they'd spent together, both on and off the battlefield. I've got you, brother, he murmured under his breath. Almost there. Foster stood nearby, watching quietly, his face softened with respect for the moment. But their peace was broken when a worker nearby scoffed, muttering under his breath, all this fuss for a piece of cargo. Jordan's hand stilled on the flag. He turned, meeting the man's gaze with a cold intensity that made the worker shrink back. This is a soldier's final journey. Show some respect. The worker looked away, muttering an apology, and Jordan took a steadying breath, letting the frustration pass. Foster gave him an approving nod, a silent acknowledgement of Jordan's restraint. With the casket properly secured, Jordan and Foster returned to the terminal, each step reinforcing his resolve to complete this journey with honor, no matter the obstacles. Jordan sat in the waiting area, his hands folded, his back straight, despite the hours of exhaustion that weighed him down. He glanced at the departure board, only to see his flight once again marked delayed. An airline staff member walked over with a tentative expression. "Major Thomas, I'm sorry to inform you, but there's been another delay." Jordan's jaw tightened, though he managed a nod. "Understood. When's the new departure time?" The staff member shrugged helplessly. "It could be several more hours. We're doing our best, but—" Without another word, Jordan nodded, his expression unreadable, his patience fraying yet steeled by the mission he'd come to fulfill. As Jordan sat, more passengers who recognized him from the videos and social media walked by, some snapping photos, others offering him words of support. "Thank you for your service, Major," one elderly woman said, reaching out a hand. "I can't believe what they're putting you through." Jordan nodded, appreciative of her kindness. "Thank you, ma'am." His phone buzzed in his hand, and he looked down to see a flood of notifications. The videos had spread like wildfire, with hashtags like #JusticeForJordan and #RespectOurHeroes trending across social media. Messages from strangers poured in, offering encouragement and outrage over the treatment he'd received. Foster leaned over, glancing at Jordan's phone. "It's turning into a movement, Jordan. People are watching, and they're not happy with what they've seen." Jordan sighed. "It's overwhelming. All I wanted was to honor Liam. But now, you're doing more than that," Foster replied, his voice steady. "You're fighting for every soldier who's ever been disregarded or disrespected. This is bigger than us." Jordan looked around the terminal, the reality settling on him. What began as a simple mission had turned into a public outcry, a demand for justice and respect. He couldn't ignore the power of what was unfolding. Seeing the tension mounting among passengers and staff, Foster stood up, his voice calm yet commanding as he addressed a group of airline employees standing nearby. "All right, listen up," he said firmly. "This man is here on an honorable mission, and he's been delayed long enough. I'll be making some calls, and I expect results." One of the employees, a young man who looked slightly intimidated, nodded. "Of course, sir. We're doing everything we can." "I've heard that before," Foster replied sharply, eyeing them. "But I want you to understand. The eyes of the nation are on this airport. People are watching how you treat a decorated officer here to honor a fallen soldier. And if you think this will go unnoticed, you're mistaken." The employees exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort visible. "Now," Foster continued, "I suggest you prioritize his flight and handle his friend's casket with the utmost respect, or the consequences will be swift." The staff members nodded, clearly feeling the pressure, and hurried off. Foster turned to Jordan, offering a reassuring nod. "We're getting you out of here, Major. I won't stand for this any longer." Jordan felt a surge of gratitude, recognizing the lengths to which Foster was going to support him. As Jordan and Foster settled back into their seats, Jordan's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from General Adams. "Major Thomas," Adams said in his commanding voice, "I've spoken with the airline CEO. They're fast-tracking your flight and ensuring that your friend's remains are handled properly. I'll be monitoring the situation personally." "Thank you, sir," Jordan replied, his voice thick with gratitude. "I didn't mean for things to escalate this way, but I couldn't leave this situation as it was." "Understood," Adams replied. "This situation never should have happened. The world is watching now, and we'll make sure they see respect and honor for our soldiers. Hang tight. We've got your back." After ending the call, Jordan looked at Foster, who had been listening intently. "Adams is pulling every string he can," Jordan said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Foster smiled. "You see, Jordan, sometimes the right people show up at the right time. This journey isn't just yours anymore." Jordan nodded, realizing the depth of Foster's words. It was no longer only about him and Liam. It had become a call for change. Hours later, an airline representative approached Jordan and Foster with a respectful nod. "Major Thomas, Lieutenant Colonel Foster," she said, her voice polite but slightly nervous. "Your flight is ready, and we've prioritized your boarding. We've also ensured that the casket is secure and prepared for transport with all the necessary protocols." Jordan gave her a nod. "Thank you. That's all I wanted." The woman smiled, looking relieved. "We're also here to offer any additional assistance you may need." As they made their way to the gate, Jordan felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He was finally moving closer to bringing Liam home. He glanced at the terminal one last time, seeing the protesters and supporters through the glass, knowing they were standing up not just for him, but for the respect every soldier deserved. Just before boarding, Foster placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You did it, Jordan. You stood your ground, and you made it clear that respect and honor are non-negotiable." Jordan nodded, feeling the weight of his mission and the support behind him. "I couldn't have done it alone. Thank you, sir, for everything." As they boarded the plane, Jordan felt a profound sense of resolve settle over him. The battle was far from over, but he had won this part, carrying Liam's memory and the voices of those who stood beside him. As dawn broke over the tarmac, Jordan gazed out the plane window, his heart heavy but steady. The plane had finally touched down in Liam's small hometown, where they would lay his friend to rest. The soft morning light painted the horizon in hues of gold and pink, a quiet reverence that matched Jordan's solemn mood. When they deplaned, Jordan watched the casket, draped in the American flag, being transferred carefully to a waiting military vehicle. Foster stood beside him, a hand on his shoulder. "You brought him this far, Jordan," Foster said quietly. "Now you're here to see it through." Jordan nodded, the enormity of the journey and its final steps settling on him. This is where he belongs, with the people who loved him. The military vehicle arrived at the peaceful cemetery, framed by rows of trees and lined with American flags that rustled softly in the breeze. Liam's family and friends stood together, a small crowd dressed in black, their faces etched with grief and gratitude. Jordan approached Liam's parents first, offering a crisp salute before taking Mrs. Donovan's hand. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for bringing him home." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat. "He was my brother, Mrs. Donovan. I wouldn't have let anyone else do it." The ceremony began, each word of tribute and each note of the bugle resonating deeply within him. As the casket was lowered, Jordan stood at attention, delivering a final, dignified salute. Every movement was deliberate, filled with the respect he'd promised Liam. After the ceremony, Mrs. Donovan approached Jordan again, her hand outstretched with a small envelope. "He wrote this before he left," she explained, her voice breaking slightly. "For you. He wanted you to have it, just in case." Jordan's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the letter. "Thank you," he murmured, nodding solemnly. Stepping away from the crowd, he unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning Liam's familiar handwriting. "Jordan, if you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. I can't thank you enough for that. I always knew you'd bring me home, one way or another. You were more than a friend. You were the brother I never had. Until we meet again. Liam." Jordan closed his eyes, the words hitting him with a force he hadn't anticipated. Folding the letter, he placed it carefully in his pocket, right next to Liam's dog tag. That evening, Jordan sat alone in his temporary lodgings, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He took out the letter again, reading it over, feeling every word resonate deeply. This journey had not only been about keeping his promise to Liam, but also about the respect and dignity every soldier deserved. He thought of the obstacles he'd faced, the indignities he'd endured, and the voices of support that had rallied around him. Foster's words echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, the right battles find you." With a deep breath, Jordan realized he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let the experiences he'd endured and the outcry that had followed be for nothing. He owed it to Liam and to himself to see this through to a larger cause. The next day, Jordan met with local veterans and community leaders at the town's Veteran Gathering Hall, a warmly lit space adorned with photos and medals of past servicemen and women. He stood before the group, sharing his story, the injustices he'd faced, and his vision for change. "We all know what it feels like to be overlooked," he said, his voice steady but passionate. "To serve with honor and come home to a country that sometimes struggles to give us the respect we deserve. But that can change. It has to change. And I want to help make that happen." The room was silent, every face attentive, moved by his words. Foster stepped up beside him, adding his own voice to the cause. "This man fought not just for his friend but for all of us," Foster said. "We need people like Jordan leading this charge for justice and reform." By the end of the meeting, they'd organized a campaign to raise awareness and demand systemic changes, not just for military personnel but for all who faced prejudice and disrespect. Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose, a mission that went beyond a single journey. As the meeting wrapped up, Mrs. Donovan approached him once more, her face softened with gratitude. "I know you'll make a difference, Jordan," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Liam would be proud." Nodding solemnly, stepping away from the crowd, he unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning Liam's familiar handwriting. "Jordan, if you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. I can't thank you enough for that. I always knew you'd bring me home, one way or another. You were more than a friend. You were the brother I never had. Until we meet again. Liam." Jordan closed his eyes, the words hitting him with a force he hadn't anticipated. Folding the letter, he placed it carefully in his pocket, right next to Liam's dog tag. That evening, Jordan sat alone in his temporary lodgings, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He took out the letter again, reading it over, feeling every word resonate deeply. This journey had not only been about keeping his promise to Liam, but also about the respect and dignity every soldier deserved. He thought of the obstacles he'd faced, the indignities he'd endured, and the voices of support that had rallied around him. Foster's words echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, the right battles find you." With a deep breath, Jordan realized he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let the experiences he'd endured and the outcry that had followed be for nothing. He owed it to Liam and to himself to see this through to a larger cause. The next day, Jordan met with local veterans and community leaders at the town's Veteran Gathering Hall, a warmly lit space adorned with photos and medals of past servicemen and women. He stood before the group, sharing his story, the injustices he'd faced, and his vision for change. "We all know what it feels like to be overlooked," he said, his voice steady but passionate. "To serve with honor and come home to a country that sometimes struggles to give us the respect we deserve. But that can change. It has to change. And I want to help make that happen." The room was silent, every face attentive, moved by his words. Foster stepped up beside him, adding his own voice to the cause. "This man fought not just for his friend but for all of us," Foster said. "We need people like Jordan leading this charge for justice and reform." By the end of the meeting, they'd organized a campaign to raise awareness and demand systemic changes, not just for military personnel but for all who faced prejudice and disrespect. Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose, a mission that went beyond a single journey. As the meeting wrapped up, Mrs. Donovan approached him once more, her face softened with gratitude. "I know you'll make a difference, Jordan," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Liam would be proud."